Gospel according to Luke, chapter 9.
Glory to you, O Lord.
Now about 8 days after these things, Jesus took with him Peter, John, and James, and went up on the mountainside to pray. And while he was praying, the appearance of his face changed, and his clothes became dazzling white. Suddenly they saw two men, Moses and Elijah, talking to him. They appeared in glory and were speaking of his departure, which he was about to accomplish at Jerusalem. Now Peter and his companions were weighed down with sleep, but since they had stayed awake, they saw his glory and the two men who stood with him. Just as they were leaving him, Peter said to Jesus, "Master, it's good for us to be here, right? Then let us make 3 dwellings, one for you, one for Moses, and one for Elijah," not knowing what he really said. And while he was saying this, a cloud came and overshadowed them, and they were terrified as they entered the cloud. Then from the cloud came a voice that said, "This is my Son, my chosen. Listen to him." When the voice had spoken, Jesus was found alone. They kept silent in those days and told no one of any of the things that they had seen. The Gospel of our Lord.
Praise to you, Lord Christ.
Please be seated. How many people here enjoy change? Anyone? Some of us do. Some of us just get into just throwing out whatever we have and going out and buying something new, right? And then there are some of us who feel a little uncomfortable with change. We think, okay, I'm safe, I'm secure, everything is known to me, even the broken things in life, and changing them requires just a little bit too much, and it makes me feel just a little too uncomfortable. We tend to feel like sometimes we really don't want change, and I think as humans, sometimes we like change. Certainly, we can be very fearful or uncertain about change, because change always represents the unknown. Will it work out? Will people like it? Will I feel the same after all the changes happen? I think we can all understand that change can be difficult. Today we read 3 different stories about change. And I thought that it would be interesting to examine those 3 stories and what kind of change is going on and how does that, change the people involved. The first was the story of Moses, and I don't know if you remember the events behind this story, but we all kind of remember the basic elements of what Moses did, right? He led the people out of Egypt, he went up onto the mountain, met with God, got the 10 commandments on those stone tablets, and then came down and he led the people as they wandered around the desert. Most of us remember those basic elements of what happened. But one of the things that we read today, one of the moments or one of the things that happened in the life of Moses is that every time he met with God, there was a change that went on. First when he went up on the mountain to get the 10 commandments, but then every time when he would meet from God to get special instructions about what the nation should do next or where should they go, when he came back from that meeting with God, he was literally glowing. You see, every time he connected with God, every time he was in this presence of God that the other people could not be in, he changed. And it's kind of like, if you think about it, radioactivity, right? What happens when you encounter something that's radioactive? It just comes right inside you, right? There's nothing you really can do to stop it except for to run away. It's this powerful force that can go through your clothes, through your skin, and just seep right into your bones. That's kind of what it was like for Moses as he encountered God each and every time. And as a result, he literally glowed because God's presence, just his mere presence, was changing and transforming Moses. Now, what's also interesting to know is that, this made the people very uncomfortable with Moses. They didn't quite like the fact that Moses was glowing. They didn't know what was going on. They knew it was because he was encountering God. But it made them feel so uncomfortable that Moses was forced to veil himself. And then the longer he was away from God, he would basically stop glowing bit by bit by bit until he went back and met with God, and then he'd be shining all over again. But this is it's a very visual kind of lesson about what happens when we encounter God. We are changed by the process. And it's not because of anything that we do, and it's not because we're good people. It's just simply being in God's presence changes us. The second story comes from what we read from this letter from Paul to the Corinthians. And we've been examining Corinthians throughout the last couple of weeks, and one of the things we have noticed is that the church at Corinth is one of the most dysfunctional, broken congregations or churches in the history of the church. They did not get along, they did not like each other, they did not love each other, they were at each other's throats. In fact, Paul had to write several letters to them, and the letter that we call 2 Corinthians is most likely 4 Corinthians or 5 Corinthians. Why? Because we don't have all of them, but he refers to other letters that he wrote, because this was a annual or biannual thing when he had to write his letter, helping them through their problems, or challenging them, or saying to them whatsoever, because they kept stumbling. And one of the issues that he's addressing in their life as a congregation is that there's way too much secrecy. He refers to what happened to Moses, and he tells them, you know, the same thing is happening to you. Whenever you gather together and worship God, you are encountering God just like Moses did. And you are being changed. You are being transformed because of this. But the church had individualized their faith or their experience of God to such an extent that all they were doing was thinking about themselves and how this could benefit their lives following Christ. And Paul challenges them and says, you know what's going on, these changes that God is bringing about in your lives, they're not supposed to be secret. They're not just for you. In fact, if you're just encountering God on your own, then you're not really transforming the way God wants you to. You're kind of being veiled. Why? Because you need to be open about what's going on in your lives. As a community, it's not just about how you individually are being transformed or changed. It's about how you as a community are being changed. And that community change, your lives and your relationships and how you interact and how you live together, that happens only as you're willing to be open about what's going on in your life. So Paul encourages them and says, be open. Don't hide things. There's nothing to fear. We all know that there are broken parts of us, there are dirty parts of us, that as we encounter God, when we worship together, God's Spirit is changing. We aren't doing the changing, God is. And he points out something that's really vital and important. It was this. And he reminds people about what happened with Moses, that we don't bring about these changes. It's not because we've given a lot of money that we then change and become like Christ. And it's not because we're obedient or that we understand theology really well. And it's not because we do a lot of acts of service. Those things that we do are expressions of how we worship God, yes. But those aren't the things that change us. What changes us is just being in God's presence. And it's a process that we cannot stop. We can slow it down a bit, and we can interfere with it a bit. We're not the force behind the change. God is doing God's work despite us. And that's such an important truth for us to remember. And the last part comes from Jesus. Jesus, at a very trying time in a moment in his life, retreats up to a mountainside with his 3 closest friends. And while he's there, they tend to almost fall asleep, but not enough so that they can't witness what goes on. But Jesus has this wonderful encounter with Moses and Elijah, and God's presence is there. And God is saying to the disciples, listen to him. This is the person who I have chosen. This is my beloved Son. And this is this wonderful supernatural encounter. And the disciples are so awed and moved by this that they want to stay. They want to build shrines and just stay in that moment all the time to worship and be with Jesus and experience that wonderfulness of being close to God. But Jesus reminds them and says, no, actually, you need to go back down the mountain. And immediately when they go back down the mountain, they encounter a very negative, difficult scene for them that they don't understand. And right away, Jesus and the disciples are reminded just how broken the world is. But in that story, there's one more truth that's important. Not only is this change happening regardless of what we do, because it's just being in God's presence that transforms us into this image of Christ. And not only is this not just an individual thing, it's a community thing, but we have to remember that the change is not for our benefit. It's for the benefit of others in a broken world. And too often, we fall into the trap in 21st century America, thinking that my relationship with God is all about me. It's about how my life can be enriched. It's about how I can be forgiven. It's about how I can benefit. And we forget this simple truth that we encounter in these three stories of change. That what God is doing in my life, God is doing not just for me, but for the benefit of others. And when we remind ourselves of that, when we live out that truth, we start understanding that the circumstances that are going on in my life, that I might not understand, and I say, God, where are you? What are you doing? God might very well be answering, well, I'm busy changing you, making you into something of a new creation for the benefit of others, so that others can encounter God's grace through the changes that come out in your life. But in order for us to really be on board with that, in order for us to embrace those changes, we have to realize that it's not all about us. That we live our lives not just for our own sense of self-fulfillment, but we live our lives so that we can be in community and so that others can benefit from the changes that are going on inside of us. And in order for that to happen, we have to be willing to be open, as Paul tells the church in Corinthians. We have to be willing to let others see the messiness that is inside of us, that God is forgiving and healing. Because if we're not willing to be open and honest about some of the broken items in our lives, then all we're doing is trying to put a veil over the changes and God's glory that is going on in our lives. Amen?
Amen.
Our takeaways for today. Being a Christian means that there is a change going on in our lives. We are being transformed into the image or reflection of Christ. This is a basic truth that we learn from the gospel. We are being transformed into the image of Christ. That is the process of what it means to follow Christ. The second one, this change happens despite us. We are not the force behind it, nor is it dependent upon us. It happens regardless. The only thing we can do is put a veil over it, somehow dirty it up and slow it down. We're not the ones that are bringing about the change. And the last one, transformation is for the benefit of others. Let's stand for our song of the day.